Welcome back to the Engineered Angler. Today we're not going to actually make lures. Well, yeah, we are going to make lures. We're going to make lures for a specific reason. We're going to be testing how the shape of a crankbait affects that dynamic action of the crankbait. And if you remember back from the crankbait master classes, we were using this Frankenstein creature here to show what the changes in bib length and bib angle did to the actual action of the lure. But this time we're going to be working with bib shape. Let me show you. These are going to be the 4 shapes we're actually going to do the experimentation with. Square bill, which really is kind of a parallelogram. A tombstone, which looks more like big white underwear. The round end, which speaks for itself. And a shape I've been wanting to really test and you don't see out there anywhere, and that is a completely round bib. And I've used round bibs on some of my lures and found it to really give a very tight but really dynamic action. Here's one made out of a dime, and here's a little micro lure that has a perfectly round bib. And the action both on this micro crankbait and that 10-cent crankbait really are much more than you'd expect from that tiny little circle. So the intention is to take 4 identical crankbaits that we're going to cast here and paint. All 4 will be coming out of the same mold, made from the same material, weighted exactly the same way, and then we'll give them generic paint jobs, color schemes that will allow you to really see any kind of movement either in roll or pitch or yaw or any other movement we might be able to see. And the lure I've decided to use is an original lure I made a few years ago, and I call it the Jelly Bean. This is a really effective crankbait. I've been using it for quite a while and had a lot of good action on it. So let me show you what it looks like just before I cast one of these things. If you look inside the mold, there's already a bib right in there, and that bib is there as just a placeholder. So when I pull the casting out, I'll just have a slot and not a bib. You can see the wire harness and the weight that goes on that harness. I'm going to create 2 more of these harnesses and we'll pour a total of 4 of these, so 3 more. Alright, so we're going to be casting these out of 2-part resin. This is actually the Alumilite version of the stuff I usually use. I usually use the Model Pro from Specialty Resins, but this was on sale. It does say mix by volume, but I've already done the calculation to figure out the differential and the specific gravity between the 2 parts A and B. So it's not a big deal. I'm going to be mixing 7 grams of part B and 7.5 grams of part A. This is part B. All right, it's 7 exactly. And before we put in part B, I got to put in the micro balloons. And if you haven't seen this before, this is a filler. It's a very, very light filler. It's actually microscopic glass spheres. So it makes the resin really buoyant. And since I'm going to use my 10% mix, there's going to be a total of about 14 grams of resin. So I'm going to use 1.4 grams of the micro balloon. So I just zero it again. And there it is, 1.4 exactly. So before we add part A, I'm going to go ahead and just blend this in. Because once part A is in there, you only have about a minute to mix it up and be able to pour it into the mold. This stuff sets up really quickly. I'll be able to demold it in about 10, maybe 15 minutes with kind of cool temperatures in here. But the warmer it is, the quicker it sets. Okay, I'm going to zero again, and we need 7.5 grams of part A. And then we'll have to mix quickly and pour it into the mold. All right, there it is, exactly. So 7.49, that's close enough. Let's get it mixed. We got to pour this in pretty quickly. All right, while this is setting up, let's go ahead and make some wire harnesses for the next 2 lures. And I'm using stainless steel leader wire. This is 174-pound leader wire. And I'm using the exact same length for all of them. And I'm putting a twist for the very front. And then we'll do that at the end for the very back of it after I get it formed with this little former. And the trick is just lay it in this form and make the bends as we follow the pattern. And the last bend is just a little kink that'll mark where to put that last twist eye. All right, let's do one more. All right, so now we have 2 exactly identical little wire harnesses. Time to put in the twist eye on the back. All right, there's our harnesses. Time to put the weight in them. And it takes a 2.3 gram lead split shot. All right, we're ready to put these in the mold. All right, we should be ready to unmold this thing. See what it looks like. All right, that looks pretty good. These little tendrils you're looking at, that's just vents to make sure I don't get any air bubbles in there. So let's pull this thing out of here. And you can see it's got the bib on there, but I just got to pull that bib off. What I do to make it come out is that I spread a little bit of Vaseline on it so it doesn't stick. That's the theory anyway. Holy shit. And I most definitely did not put enough Vaseline in this thing. All right, well, it won't come out, so luckily that's one of the shapes we want to use. This is the square bib. So we'll just clean this thing up and get it ready for painting, and we'll make sure that the next one has plenty of Vaseline so it doesn't get stuck in there. All right, so that's going to be the first one with the bib in it. The rest we'll put the bib in after we've actually painted them. And the typical bib this thing takes is a 1 inch by 1 inch square bill. And this time I'm going to be certain that this thing is well coated with some petroleum jelly to make sure it doesn't get stuck in the casting. I think what happened last time is I probably didn't put enough on the edges. That's really where it sticks. Everything else is super smooth. So the bill goes in there first. All right, and now we just stick our harness in this thing, and there's a little slot in for the tie-on eye that's right there, and it slides right in, and then it just drops in to its location there. You know, it's just a matter of putting the other lid on, and we're ready to put it in the holder and cast another one. All right, we'll have one more after this one. All right, so let's talk about the shapes. Of course, the first one is the standard square bill. And then I'm going to cut the same shape into a tombstone shape by cutting the corners off, and I've already got them templated. And then the round end is the same kind of deal. I'm just going to cut off the corners with a nice rounded edge. And then the circular one I'm having to make out of a bigger bib. But the idea is that the circle is the same height as the rest of them. So the diameter equals the height of all the bibs. But let's talk a little bit about why I'm hoping this test is actually going to be meaningful. First of all, there's a lot that goes into what a lure does. The action of a lure in the water due to the bib. There's a few things that we can control. We can control the line, the connection at the lure, the weight of the lure, the speed that it gets retrieved. All those things are controllable. But as I change the shape, I need to control all the other variables in this. Now, since the lure is set up, the angles are going to be okay. And I debated on whether I should hold the depth, in other words, the distance from where it comes out of the slot to the end of the bib, hold that equal throughout, or whether I should hold the area equal, because both can really be an influence on how this thing is going to act. And both are controllable. If I wanted to control the area, all I'd have to do is make sure all of them weigh exactly the same, because they're all the same thickness and they're all made out of the same material. So the only thing that varies is the weight. And if the weight is all the same, thickness is all the same, material is the same, then the area on the surface will all be the same. But in my mind, the more impactful dimension is going to be the distance from the head of the lure to the end of the bib. I think the farther out it goes, the greater leverage it has. If it has greater area, it's still going to have a difference, but maybe not as much as the length. So each one of these are going to be the same distance from the root to the very end of it. That's why the round one has the diameter of the depth. I hope that makes sense. I did put some thought into it, but there's still a lot that's difficult to control. We're going to do what we can. All right, let's see if this one is ready to come out of the mold. Yeah, it looks like it's set up pretty nicely, but I want to show you something. If you're new to casting lures out of two-part epoxy, you can see it has a little bit of a sheen, and actually that sheen is a little bit of a blush. It'll evaporate off eventually, but it actually becomes a real problem if you try to finish this lure too early after it's cured. So that brings us to the question of the week. So the question was, how long after I get the lure out of the mold do I need to wait for me to be able to paint it? If you've tried right away, even just cleaning it first, you'll see that you're probably going to get a bunch of fish eyes in your paint, and the clear coat is going to hate it. So there is a cure time for this thing to be able to be cleaned after it's cured and then painted and finished. So I've been asked, how much time does it take to fully cure? Now the reality is that, just strictly speaking, this kind of epoxy doesn't really fully cure unless it's heat treated. But that's okay, because we don't really need the full strength of the epoxy material. What we need is for this thing to be hard enough to be a lure, but cured enough to accept paint. And actually that's the tricky part, because in my experience, if you rush it, you'll end up with a really shabby paint job. So how long Well, if you have no way to actually heat cure it, then wait at least a week. And then what I like to do is wash it with some mild soap and water, let it dry, and then before you paint, wipe it down with alcohol. That usually does the trick. If you continue to get fish eyes, then you're going to need to wait for a little longer. But if you can get your hands on an old toaster oven, you can always hang them in there, set it at a nice low setting. I try to keep it below 200, somewhere between 150 and 170. And I'll give it an hour of cure time. That usually allows me to wipe it down with acetone and start painting right away. I have had casting resins from producers that really was resistant to really completely curing. It would always have a little bit of that sort of almost oily blush on the outside. But I came up with a trick that works pretty well almost all the time, and that's heat it up in the oven, and while it's still hot, pull it out and dip it in your favorite wood sealer. I use the polyacrylic. I dip it down, leave it in there till it cools, and as it cools, it'll draw in that sealer into all the little exterior pores. Once it dries, it'll seal it really well and won't allow that blush to come out anymore. Well, hopefully that answers the question and helps you get a better finish. All right, let's get that next lure out of the mold. All right, it looks good. Bit of flash, but that comes right off. All right. Let's hope this works. Oh, there it goes. Came right out. All right, you can see the slot nicely formed. Now I'm just going to clean it up a little bit, get the little sprue mushroom off, and it goes straight into the oven to cure for an hour, maybe even 2, while I cast the third and last one. Got 170, 180. That's perfect. Alright, that should do the trick. Alright, we got these ready to go. I've got a coat of white paint on them and also a really fine coat of the polyacrylic just to seal it so we can work with this without messing up the white paint. So let me show you the paint job we're going to do. I'm hoping this pattern will give us a good indication with like really subtle differences in the lure action. All right, 3 more to go. So now just before I install these bibs, what I like to do is take and just rough up the surface right where it's going to go in the body of the lure. Not too much. I don't want it to show. It doesn't take much to really hold this in, and I'll be sure to do both sides. I hope you can see that. And I wipe it with a little bit of alcohol. And then what I'm going to do is just stick a little bit of UV resin down into the slot. Not a whole lot. And if it oozes out a little bit, that's okay. I can wipe it off. But the beauty of using the clear Lexan is that the UV light will travel right through it and cure the UV resin all the way down in the bottom. We got a little squeeze out on this side. That's all right. And then I'll just hit it with the UV light and let it run down into it. And it doesn't take but, maybe 30 seconds. And if I get tired of holding it, I can just turn on the little spotlight and set the lure right on top and let it sit there for maybe 2 or 3 minutes, and then I can be sure it's going to be set. And I'll do the same with the next 2. And we'll be ready to take these to the water. Be sure to watch to the end because I'll have the details for the lure giveaway. All right, we're out here on the lake and I've got all the test lures right here. Now you notice there's no hooks on them. I'm going to be using these little hook replacement weights, and all they are is a snap with a little split shot on it, and they weigh about the same as a number 4 hook. I don't like using hooks when I'm trying lures out because hooks do change the way they actually move, and this is the way I always do it when I'm trying out a brand new lure. And I'm going to be putting it on the line with a little snap. This way I don't have to worry about one knot being different from another knot. Alright, I'm not going to waste any time with any shots from above. Let's go directly underwater and see what they look like in the environment they're meant for. And we'll start out with the square bill. That'll be our standard. This is a bib shape I'm really familiar with. It's what I use on this lure most of the time. And you can see it's got a big head shake. You can feel it in the rod. That thump comes right through the line. And if you watch it, you'll see that it isn't equal on either side. Sometimes it'll jerk to one side and then the other. I think this is what makes it really a lethal lure. You'll see it jump to the left and then jump to the right. At half the speed, you can really see the tail shaking that little weight. And that asymmetry in the action. It really does want to sort of jump to the left and then jump to the right. At quarter speed, you can really see how it wants to move the tail more to one side and then more to the other. This is definitely a setup I really like. This is the tombstone shape, and you can immediately see that it has a much tighter head movement. At half speed, the difference is really obvious. You can see there's not that much of a head movement, but it still has a pretty good movement. And at quarter speed, you can see how much more stable it runs. A lot less jerking to the left and then to the right. Still a pretty nice action. This is the round end bib, and you can see it has a really similar action, almost identical to the tombstone bib. It's really tight and pretty stable. It does have a little more movement to the left and right, I think. And I think at quarter speed, you can see that it's a little less stable in action. The head movement is about the same, but it does want to move to the left and the right sort of erratically. So the circle bib is a weird combination. It has a bigger head shake, not quite as big as the square bill, but it has a much more erratic movement. It was hard to keep it in frame. You can see it just jerk to the left, jerk to the right, and sometimes it'll just jerk right out of frame. It was really hard to keep the camera on it. In quarter speed, you can really see how it rolls to the side and then moves to one side and then rolls to the other side. I really like the action on this. I'll be using this more, for sure. Let me know which one you guys think is best. Which one are you going to use more of? Alright, I figured I'd show you this lure actually works. I put it in a live well. So we have a little time to weigh it, because you know what comes next. You got to guess the weight to win the lure. So the guess has to be pounds, ounces, and 2 decimal points. The closest to the actual weight without going over will win. You have to be a subscriber to win, and any tie will go to the first person who put in their guess. Look in the description for the deadline for submission. And the winner is going to get that really nice segmented mullet crankbait I made in 2022. It's a nice bait. It runs around 2 to 4 feet deep and has a really nice action. Before you go, leave me a like. I'll see you on the next video.